Welcome to the Welsh Woodman workshop, and in tonight's project we're going to be turning this monster piece of ash into a large platter or maybe a wall hanging. We'll see how it goes. Now I was originally going to make this into a table, so it's got bark on either edge. I thought it'd be a nice natural edge table, but it's picked up a heck of a twist, and it's probably because it was a crotch piece and we got the pith of the wood there that's affected it. Now normally I could plane out if it was a bit of a cup, but with twists I tend to stay away for a table. So what we're going to do is make this into a large sort of blank, and we're going to be using the VB36 to turn this. So I just cut this out on the bandsaw, which was a bit of a challenge because of the twist, so you can probably see still how much of a twist is in this, but it's got this really nice bark inclusion, and I'm going to try and use that on the front of the platter. Mounting the faceplate, then what I've done is I've drawn a circle the same diameter as the circle on the faceplate. I'm going to line that up, and I'm going to be using an impact driver to whack in some screws. Now because this is a large piece, I'm going to use all the screw holes I've got there just to give me a bit more support. Right, how we attach it then, so this bayonet type fitting is pretty quirky. So it goes through, twists, and we just use a spanner then to tighten them up. But this is brilliant because there's no way this is going to unwind or unthread. So got him running now on the lathe on quite a slow speed, and you can see that the ghost in there, so how much of a twist we've got to turn out. So hopefully we'll be able to get that out successfully. I think what I am going to do, just to give us a big old grip on this, is cut in a mortise so we can expand our jaws of our chuck into, and we have a nice sturdy hold then on this piece. Now when setting a mortise, you want to try and match the profile of your jaws and obviously the depth of your jaws with the groove that you're going to be cutting in. So what I tend to do is I'll measure the length of the jaws, which is 15mm in this Nova Chuck's case, and I've got a little depth stop that I set to that distance. So as I'm cutting out my groove, I use this to make sure I've got down to the right depth, and I'll just give you a little bit more secure a hold if the workpiece is actually touching against this portion of the chuck I found. So we're going to do that now, then we're going to turn the rest of the profile. Okay, we've got a nice recess on the inside there, and I've sort of matched the angle of the dovetails on my jaws. What we're going to do next then is screw up the edge. So the profile, I've got a swept back profile on my gouge. I'm going to do lots of pull cuts. This is going to remove material really quickly. That shattering then is obviously the warp in the wood. We do nice light cuts, it won't dig in. See the sort of cuts we're getting, long shavings. These are very, very dry. These are bone dry, so it's a lot tougher than if this was green to turn. So you can see the high spots then we're starting to take off, and the low spots are still sort of very grainy and fibrous. So we just need to continue going and going and going until we get rid of this, and we can start then actually shaping the profile itself. So when you start rubbing the bevel, you're going to get sort of cuts like this. So long, thin streams coming off. And that sort of tells you if you've got good bevel contact. So what's happening is some of those sort of high spots are starting to go, and we're cutting along the whole profile of the bowl. We should be getting stuff that looks like this coming off. So when I'm turning, I'm going to try and look at this sort of end of the platter, as that gives me an indication of my cuts, of how much I'm taking off. So something to note then, the speed on the inside is a lot slower than the speed on the outside. So if we think of it as an athlete running around a running track, towards the centre of the track is going to be less distance, so towards the outside of the track it's going to be more distance to cover, but it has to cover it at the same rate. So it's going to be faster there. So as we're moving our tool movements, we need to be taking that into consideration as we're moving the tool across the work. Progress so far. So I've got this sort of shape, so it comes a little bit of a foot, goes in, comes out, goes in again. So like a swervy shape. I'm going to refine this curve a little bit more to make it a little bit more elegant. But we're getting the bark sort of inclusion coming through, so we need to be very careful how much we take off this. So I finished all my cutting with the gouges and I'm ready to move on to the sanding stage. So I've got quite a nice finish on there, and that's because of the push cut I was using. I've got very little tear out. The only problem area I did come across is this area here. So a little bit of chattering after the tool was coming over these cracks. So I'm just going to have to do a tiny bit of sanding to get those out. What I did before my final cut is I resharpened my tools to a razor sharp edge, and that's really reduced the amount of sanding I'm going to have to do next. So you can see how twisted this is. So I've got a really thin bit there and quite a thick bit at the top. So if you have to remount a piece of work and you're using a chuck, I suggest trying your jaws out on the piece of work to make sure you're getting a firm, secure hold before you reverse them, and then you know you've got a perfect fit then before you actually turn the other side. So I've remounted the bowl on the other side on the chuck, and what I'm going to do is a couple of pull cuts then to get this surface all nice and flat and level. Then we can decide how thick we want the rim of this platter to be, then hollow out the middle section slightly. Okay, so these are the sort of shaving cuts we're getting. So you can see it's really fine. That's what we should be aiming for, to get a nice good finishing cut. So what I tend to do is sharpen the tools before you do your finishing cut, and you get these really fine sort of thin shavings coming off, and that's ideal then for reducing the amount of sanding you need to do. Just got the lathe running in reverse, and I'm going to be sanding then this portion of the platter before taking out the centre. So I've got more support in the centre, and that's going to allow me then to sand this one without it moving too dramatically. So we're getting some lovely figure in the grain here, so the grain across the grain. I think the word for that is chatoyance. Originally comes from oeil de chat, which is French for cat eye, and it's meant to reflect the light, a bit like light in a cat's eyes at night. So I thought about maybe making this into a coloured rim platter, a bit of a Jimmy Clue special, but looking at the grain pattern in this, and especially the crack in there from the crotch piece, I think we're just going to leave this a natural sort of finish. So I've just applied a beeswax finish to the platter itself around the rim. Now, what I'm going to do, this is a tip I picked up from Wayne the Woodturner. I'm going to be using an old sort of nylon brush or toothbrush you could use in the grooves, and some compressed air to get rid of any of those bits of tissue paper that have caught as we're applying the finish and buffing it up. So we're going to use another depth stop to gauge how deep we need to turn down to, and these are really useful to use, otherwise you tend to turn out the bottom, especially if you put a sort of mortise joint in there. And I've got enough lampshades as it is, so I don't need another one. So I'm going to be using this as I'm turning. What I'm going to start off by doing is drilling a depth hole with my bowl gouge. So just in the centre, and that's really handy because with that hole gone in the centre, you're not likely to get a catch by going past the centre. So we're going to do that and then get the middle turned out. So I'm moving over now to an old coach, it's an old Robert Sorbet. See how old there is, the logo's changed. But this has got a sort of far sharper angle, so there's 90 and it's just swept back from 90 slightly, and the cutting edge is all the way across there. So I'm just going to use that for the very bottom of the plait. So I've gone a little bit thicker than I normally would for a platter, and that's purely because of the crack. I don't want to go too thin because it's probably going to split and crack off. So this is probably not the safest bit of wood to turn at home. Obviously it's a lovely feature for the looks of it, but it can be really dangerous and you have bits flying across the workshop. So you need to take that into consideration if you get any cracks or splits in your wood like that. You need to keep safe. So the only problem areas I've got is just after this crack. I've got some little shatter marks there, slightly before it as well. So we're just going to clean those up with the sandpaper, then we'll be ready to put another wax finish over the top. So I put it on a low speed to begin with, especially because of the little crack in here. It's going to disintegrate the paper at a high speed. So finally got the piece all done, and this was definitely a challenging turn, mainly because of this big crack coming through. So if I was to do this again, I would choose a piece, I think, without a crack in, even though it makes a nice feature, as it'd be a heck of a lot easier to turn, as I had trouble, a little bit of tool chattering either side of the crack, and I had to do a little bit of hand sanding to get rid of that. So I've gone for a wax finish on this. I think in hindsight, again, I'd probably would have gone for an oil, as I'd got a more even coat, but pretty happy with it overall. So bring it nice and close so you can see the features. So a lot of figure in the grain, so a figure across the grain as well, which makes it quite interesting. And the back then, you can see the crack going all the way through. And the little mortise in the bottom, I'm going to wood turn a little logo disc and brand it. So that covers up that mortise, as that's frowned upon in wood turning clubs. It's a nice way of hiding it and branding your work. So overall, pretty happy with it. It was a good challenge, and it was nice to try the VB36 out. If you've enjoyed tonight's project, please consider subscribing, as it helps me out, and then I can get some more wood turning or woodworking videos your way. Hope you have a great night. Hope to see you in the next video. North Star.